Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm indeed grateful for the recognition permitting me to join this most important debate in our nation's history this afternoon, and I express my gratitude as well to the Honourable Penelope Beckles-Robinson, the opposition leader of this great republic, and to, of course, the leader of opposition business, Dr. Amory Brown, Senator Amory Brown, for the opportunity to contribute. I joined the debate today, Mr. President, not in opposition to law enforcement, not in denial of the seriousness of crime in Trinidad and Tobago, and not in ignorance of the real fear that many citizens feel in this country, in their homes, in their businesses, in our communities. I joined the debate, Mr. President, today because this bill asks us to do something far more serious than confront crime. This bill asks us fundamentally to alter the relationship that exists between the citizen and the state, between liberty and military power, between constitutional restraint and executive discretion, Mr. President. The debate at its core is about constitutional discipline, and it is because crime is so serious in Trinidad and Tobago that constitutional discipline matters most today. Our Constitution was not written for moments of calm. It was written for moments of pressure, moments when fear tempts us to trade liberty for the promise of order, Mr. President. The framers of our Constitution understood something very clearly, and that understanding was that the greatest threat to freedom does not arise when government is weak, which it currently is, but when government is angry or forms a belief that ordinary law is no longer sufficient. Section 3 of this bill, Mr. President, declares its inconsistency with Sections 4 and 5 of our Constitution, and we must ask ourselves, what powers are we normalizing and at what constitutional cost? And let's be clear and precise about what this bill does. This bill at Section 6 empowers the Prime Minister in her capacity as the Chairman of the National Security Council, and by her executive decision only, to declare any community within Trinidad and Tobago a zone of special operations, Mr. President. And within such a zone, the Prime Minister then has the ability to deploy a joint command which comprises the police and defense force into that designated community. And while there, this joint command can establish cordoned areas, curfews, conduct stop, search, seizure exercises without a warrant, make arrests and detention without a warrant, and detain persons without charge, and present them to court subsequently within a period of time unspecified by the legislation, then for the court to determine whether they should be continued on detention, again without charge for a further period. That's at Section 18, subsection 2B of the bill, Mr. President. And all of this occurs based on that sole discretion by our Prime Minister. Sole discretion. Section 6 of the bill does not require the Prime Minister to consult with anyone or to be advised by anyone. It is later on, in a subsequent section at Section 7, where we see the Prime Minister required to consult with the Commissioner of Police and the Chief of Defence Staff, which relates to an extension of the period of time for that zone of special operations existence, Mr. President. Now, this discretion, we are asked to give that discretion to the Prime Minister that's on record for supporting extrajudicial unlawful killings of persons who are accused of drug trafficking without any evidence being presented for public consideration, without due process of law, without any attempt to arrest, intercept, or detain, without confirmation of whether these persons were within or outside of the territorial waters of any sovereign state. And most alarmingly, Mr. President, in the face of information that our own citizens were victims of these extrajudicial killings. These strikes, Mr. President, our own citizens, Mr. President, our people, members of our communities, our Prime Minister referred to our people when she is on record saying, kill them violently. So it is the same Prime Minister that will have this sole discretion to determine whether the military arm of the state should occupy our communities. The same Prime Minister who has no experience or training in policing, who's not practiced law for decades, the same Prime Minister whose government has imposed
Mr. President,
a continuing
46-4, offensive, insulting.
I would advise that you kind of address your matter without necessarily and so on imputing or using language that could be interpreted as offensive. Continue.
Mr. President, always grateful for the guidance, your astute guidance, Mr. President. So it is the same government that has imposed a continuing state of emergency in the country since July 2025, and to date that's some 194 days and counting. And it's the same government under whose leadership approximately 134 persons are detained at the ECRC, the Eastern Correctional Rehabilitation Center in Santa Rosa, and so many others like Ms. Olive Jack, who remains detained without charge at the women's prison, those who are detained at Golden Grove and MSP, and who knows where else. And it really is impossible for us to separate this bill from the SOE, because the narrative behind the introduction of this bill, Mr. President, is that this bill is an attempt to secure, quote, the gains made. Because the learned Attorney General is on Hansard saying, quote, at the end of the state of emergency, it is important to have something in place to continue the gains made. The Honorable Attorney General also made reference to one Mr. Wayne Head, who warned that crime could surge if emergency powers are lifted without proper contingency planning. So all well and good. Except I ask the question, of the hundreds of persons detained under the SOE for close to 200 days by the 31st of January 2026, how many have been charged since their detention? My information, Mr. President, always subject to correction, is that less than 10% of the 134 men currently detained under detention, preventative detention orders pursuant to the State of Emergency Regulations 2025, less than 10% of them have been charged since their detention, Mr. President. And less than 10% of them have been interviewed by the police. Now, what is the significance of being interviewed by the police if you're in custody? Well, for the benefit, Mr. President, of the viewing and listening public, the way that policing is supposed to work and works in Trinidad and Tobago and any free and fair democratic society is that the police would either receive information or a report of a crime, or they would gather intelligence by some intelligence gathering exercise intentionally, and they would form a reasonable suspicion based on that information gathered. And they would make inquiries of the suspect. And very often, Mr. President, the police may interview a suspect even before that person is arrested. And in fact, where there is not even a direct report made by a victim, where the police are acting solely on information or intelligence, very often the police would solicit an interview with the suspect before determining whether to lay a charge or not, Mr. President. And there's a reason for this. The reason for this is because a suspect under caution quite oftentimes says something to cause the police to charge him or her. It is very often the words of the suspect himself that causes him to be charged. And those words are then used against him in his own prosecution. And that, Mr. President, is why we have caution, why we have fundamental rights to silence, a right to not incriminate oneself. And the right to silence, Mr. President, is, it is unfettered, it is absolute. It is a right that you can't take away from somebody. And it's because it is so important. And therefore, if it is that we understand that in policing, a suspect might aid the police in his own prosecution, well, wouldn't it therefore make sense to have interviewed at least half of these 134 people that are sitting down in ECRC? So, Mr. President, one must ask what progress really and truly has been made under the SOE, because it seems to us that notwithstanding each detention order setting out, as required by the regulations, the information possessed by the relevant Minister of National Security that causes him to detain the person in the first place. Notwithstanding that, the police are not acting in the interest of securing a prosecution. So how is it that we have 134 men here in detention and we are talking about gains after less than 10% of them are being pursued for prosecution? So what gains? What gains are we talking about when in the papers a couple days ago we saw that the murder rate is higher in January 2026 to that date than it was in January 2025? How many detentions can we look forward to that will lead to successful prosecutions, Mr. President? Or is it that the plan was simply to detain people for as long as possible? And if so, then how can we as citizens believe that this is a real crime-fighting strategy? Mr. President, this type of behavior is simply unsustainable, unjustifiable, ineffective. It is a danger to law-abiding citizens. And I mean, if we are detained as law-abiding citizens, we have under this SOE, we have no real course to justice. We've lost the presumption of innocence. We have lost the right to be told the reason for our detention, other than what is on the face of the detention order. We've lost the right to defend ourselves, and we have to wait until the 31st of January when the state of emergency ends. So considering all of that, how are we to believe that this bill is not going to be another arbitrary exercise of executive power unleashed on the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago? Sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution, Mr. President, this Constitution here, it does not include aspirational language. It doesn't include decorative language, Mr. President. It gives us justiciable guarantees as citizens in this country, Mr. President. Among those guarantees, a right to life, a right to liberty, a right to security of the person, a right to enjoyment of property, the right to due process of law, the freedom from arbitrary arrest or detention, the right to a fair hearing, protection, Mr. President, against the abuse of state power. But this bill, Mr. President, authorizes the Prime Minister to do exactly what sections 4 and 5 prohibit. It allows the power of arbitrary detention, warrantless intrusion, and executive action without judicial supervision, Mr. President. And this bill allows the Prime Minister alone, not a judge, not members of Parliament who are elected by the citizens to represent them, not an independent Security Council, the Prime Minister alone to determine where a zone of special operations should exist. And this Senate, this Honorable Senate, as protectors of the citizens, is asked to approve the Prime Minister's ability to militarize civilian space without civilian safeguards. Now, Mr. President, I'll be the first to recognize the very hard-working and dedicated men and women of the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. These men and women serve their country honorably, with dedication, with integrity. But, Mr. President, let us make no mistake here today. These men and women are soldiers. They are soldiers. They are not trained in civilian policing. They are not trained in civilian use of force policy. They are not trained in evidence collection and evidence preservation. They do not operate under the same accountability structures as the police. And, Mr. President, to top it all off, these people did not ask for that training. The men and women who work in the Defense Force in Trinidad and Tobago, they made a conscious decision to become soldiers. They didn't ask to become police officers. So the facts that I'm talking about today is not meant to be an indictment on them. It is a statement of fact. And by way of example, I decided to be a lawyer. This is the profession I have chosen, and it is unfair to deploy me to conduct some medical procedure and then attempt to hold me accountable in law if something goes wrong. So that we mustn't pretend that this bill does not place soldiers into civilian communities with expanded operational authority, while simultaneously removing civilian legal safeguards that justify the force that is contemplated within the bill. Mr. President, the combination of these factors simply is dangerous. The combination increases the likelihood of lethal encounters. It increases the risk of unconstitutional and extrajudicial killings. It increases the probability of failed prosecutions and the failure to secure evidence. It increases the inevitability of constitutional litigation against the state. And these increased risks really can't be labeled as any kind of conjecture because there are historical facts internationally to support this. Mr. President, moving away from that, context matters when it comes to legislating. The country currently is in a state of alarm and concern arising most recently from the very unfortunate killing of a young man only 31 years old and the shooting and consequential paralysis of a young woman a mere few days ago via an interaction with the police. And I wish to pause, particularly on behalf of my colleagues, to extend condolences to the members of the Samaru and the Seeley families. These young people, as far as the public is aware, were not criminals. They have no criminal history. There's no criminal record. And video footage shows that Mr. Samaru surrendered with raised hands before being shot multiple times, Mr. President. That is the context I'm referring to when I say context matters. And what concerns me even more, and concerns the people of Trinidad and Tobago even more, is that the Commissioner of Police is quoted as saying on the 20th of January 2026, quote, "The occupants, instead of choosing to surrender, instead chose to challenge my officers, and acting in accordance with the use of force policy, my officers responded likewise. After an exchange of gunfire, 2 individuals were found nursing gunshot injuries." That's what the Commissioner of Police is on record as saying, as reported in the daily newspapers. Notwithstanding a very clear pronouncement that came from the TTPS, from the Commissioner of Police, that the police came under fire and they had no choice but to respond with gunfire. The public was then made aware of the true events of the actual shooting, and that was made aware to the people of Trinidad and Tobago via civilian camera footage, not police camera footage, not body cam footage, civilian private property camera footage. This entire incident is a real travesty for the people of Trinidad and Tobago, a travesty for those 2 families. Not only was a life lost, but a person is left paralyzed and children are left without a parent. And the TTPS is now shrouded in mistrust from the public because of this incident. So there are no winners in this situation, Mr. President. That is the context to which I refer. Yet it is against that backdrop we are told, give us more power, fewer safeguards, and less oversight. That, Mr. President, I respectfully submit, is simply not how trust is built. On the contrary, history teaches us that this is a recipe for further disconnect between the citizens and the police. And this is something that this Senate must avoid at all costs. The citizens cannot mistrust the police if we are to make any real progress in crime fighting, Mr. President. And so I ask the government to refrain from setting up the TTPS to fail. Refrain from setting up the police to fail by introducing this bill. Withdraw this bill and let us come together to enhance the law without removing constitutional rights. Let us recognize what we need is support for the TTPS to increase detection, to increase intelligence gathering, to increase prosecutorial strength, and to treat chronic institutional inefficiencies, Mr. President. That is what we need. And I'm sure the question will arise, well, what has been done in the last 10 years in this regard? Well, the former administration, Mr. President, worked hard to support the criminal justice system by introducing the AJIPA legislation, which removed a decades-long backlog of preliminary inquiries. And in the furtherance of that, the last administration introduced several masters to assist in moving criminal prosecutions through the system in a much shorter time, by providing a new court space at the International Waterfront Center for the Criminal High Court so that the Hall of Justice could accommodate more criminal assizes and more criminal judges, Mr. President. The last administration introduced anti-gang legislation and amendments to the Bail Act, introduced the Interception of Communications Act, and that is a very important piece of legislation because it specifically allows the police to go after the communications taking place between the prison and those on the outside of the prison, which we know facilitates the continuation of criminal activities even after persons are lawfully incarcerated. And the former administration did all of this while dealing with the rise in crime which came from the likes of live sport and similar programs which originated between 2010 and 2015, which facilitated crime and criminality of a magnitude never before seen in this country, Mr. President. The former administration acted decisively to address the leadership of the TTPS by appointing a substantive commissioner of police, Gary Griffith. And that was after some 10 years of not having a substantive commissioner of police before. So, Mr. President, I submit that there are many ways that we as legislators can collaborate to address the scourge of crime. But, Mr. President, to ask this Senate to give this Prime Minister the ability to unleash quasi-military occupation of certain communities is just unfair. In determining whether this bill is necessary and proportionate, Mr. President, we must remind ourselves that our Constitution was written for moments like this. When fear tempts us to abandon restraint, we must ask ourselves whether we govern by fear or by law, whether we protect people by defending their rights or by suspending their rights. This bill asks us as a country to abandon our duty to uphold our Constitution as a free and fair democratic society governed by law, due process, equality, and inclusion. And we must recognize and see this bill for what it is. It is an attempt to suppress certain sectors of our society, Mr. President. The same sectors of our society that have faced unemployment by the tens of thousands. The same sectors of society that have faced exorbitant taxes, putting them out of business. This government asked the Senate to authorize the Prime Minister to take away our rights, our voice, our activism. And that's the same Prime Minister who buff us and tell us behave, who say she gonna bust head, who say kill them violently, who buff for the Law Association, buff for the Energy Chamber, buff for local government workers, and buff for the independent senators in the Senate. That is governance by big stick, Mr. President. We on this side reject it. We reject suppression of rights. We reject the suppression of state abuse hurled and thrust upon the people of this country. We reject hiding behind this naked attempt to suppress voices, reasonable democratic voices in this country, Mr. President. Mr. President, I thank you very kindly.
Anybody else? The Honorable Foster Cummings.
Mr. President, I thank you for the opportunity to contribute to the debate on the law reform zones of special operations, special security and community measures Bill 2025. This bill, Mr. President, attempts to fight crime by suspending fundamental rights and freedoms. It seeks safety by weakening those rights and freedoms. It substitutes normal policing with exceptional force and constitutional protections with executive discretion. Mr. President, within the zones of special operations, it permits extraordinary measures, including warrantless searches, restrictions on movement, curfews, and enhanced security powers that would be unconstitutional in any other part of the country outside of the declared zones. History teaches us, Mr. President, that when states respond to crime by curtailing liberties, the long-term costs often outweigh the short-term gains. And, Mr. President, crime, or at least the approach by this current government to crime, emphasizes heavily on overstepping certain fundamental rights of our citizens. Now, I would be the first, having been exposed to a community that one might consider as a high-risk area and serving that community for a number of years, I have a full appreciation of what are some of the problems we face in this society. But the question is this the solution? Mr. President, the most telling feature of this bill is that it openly acknowledges its own constitutional infirmity. The bill expressly states that it infringes Section 4 and 5 of the Constitution, the very provisions that protect personal liberty, freedom of movement, freedom from arbitrary search, and the right to due process. As a result, it requires a special 3/5 majority for passage. That admission alone should cause the Senate to pause. Parliament does not lightly override fundamental rights, and when it does so, it must be satisfied that the infringement is strictly necessary, proportionate, time-limited, and supported by overwhelming national consensus. And so today the opposition questions whether that threshold has been met. The question we have to ask ourselves, all of us, as members of this Senate, on behalf of the law-abiding citizens of this country, is, are we prepared to sacrifice those rights where we live? Are we satisfied that in order to treat with the obvious crime problem that we have in the country, that we are okay where we live, that on our approach to our home, that community has been declared a zone of interest, special operation, and that there is a cordon in place, that we are stopped, that we are traumatized, that our family in the motor vehicle with us have to undergo searches, that when we get home with our young daughter or young son, that the police has the authority to enter your home without warrant, search and traumatize your family? Are we satisfied that we here as senators are prepared to make that sacrifice in order to treat with this problem? Because you see, as long as it is in Laventille or Morva or Maloney or La Hokita or wherever we suspect that this special zone might be, we might be okay in voting for this legislation because it does not touch us. But the authority that we give to the government today through this legislation does not spell out for us today where these locations are. Tomorrow it could be right at your doorstep. And if you are prepared to say to your 5-year-old child, or your wife, or your husband, or your grandchildren, that you are giving today the government without the safeguards of a state of emergency, the power to declare any area, including around your home, as a zone of special operation, and giving these forces the right to do what this bill allows them to do, then you may feel comfortable placing that vote. Granting the state power to suspend constitutional freedoms within designated communities is one of the most serious acts this Parliament can undertake. It must never become routine. It must never become routine. It must never be driven by political expediency. We find this bill dangerous in its breadth and constitutionally troubling in its design, Mr. President. It concentrates extraordinary power in the executive, weakens judicial oversight, and risks normalizing emergency measures as a permanent feature of governance. Citizens observing the state of emergency, the extension of the state of emergency, were wondering whether this government would be spending its 5 years in office having a state of emergency in place in Trinidad and Tobago? Well, the answer is here. In order not to have to do that, the government has brought this legislation not to utilize the same safeguards as a state of emergency, but to say that within the executive, that the Prime Minister will have the authority to declare any community within Trinidad and Tobago as a zone of special operation. Not that the Parliament will have the opportunity to debate the matter if it has to be extended, but that power to extend will also rest with the Prime Minister. And we will get the courtesy of a statement with regard to declaring a particular area a zone of special operation. Mr. President, once a law announces that it will operate even though inconsistent with sections 4 and 5, the public must understand what is at stake. Those sections protect, among other things, personal liberty, security of the person, enjoyment of property, freedom of movement, privacy, and the protection of the law. So when the government says, in effect, that this bill will operate even if inconsistent with those rights, what it is really saying is that within a declared zone, the ordinary citizen may be will lawfully be subjected to measures that would be unconstitutional anywhere else. Now, something as fundamental as this, I would think, should be told to citizens before, so that they understand what yellow is the code means. I would imagine that when you are campaigning to ask the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago for their support to enter the corridors of power and take control of the executive, that you would say to them, coming very soon in our attempt to treat with the crime problem of which all of us are concerned, is a bill that will allow us to declare certain areas a zone of special operation, where you will no longer enjoy the rights that are enshrined in the Constitution to protect you as a citizen from abuse of power and otherwise. And this could be anywhere. This could be Kakandi in Felicity. This could be Siparia. This could be Point Fortin. This could be Glencoe. This could be Westmoreland. This could be Valsayn. It can be anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago, Charlottesville, Lansfomie, Speyside, Couva, Mason Hall, Diego Martin, Mbakade, Gulfview, train line, anywhere. Nowhere, anywhere in Trinidad and Tobago, Mr. President. The bill confirms, Mr. President, it empowers the Joint Command to establish cordons and pose curfews. We all have our history in this country about curfews. For those of us who experienced the 1990 experience, for those of us who were around during the pandemic, experience the situation of the inconvenience of curfews. It allows for extraordinary search and seizure powers, Mr. President. It provides for arrest and detention under a special regime. And we know that Senator Boodoo gave us some facts about detentions right now and those persons who are currently held in detention. Mr. President, take freedom of movement. The bill contemplates curfews that confines residents and restrict movement within their own communities. This has a profound interference with ordinary life, with work, with school, with family obligations, with worship, with medical care, with attendance to parliamentary sit-ins. So it then falls to the police officer on duty for you to explain to them what your emergency is that requires you to move freely within this zone of special operation. And if they don't agree, I don't know what recourse you have, but to possibly be detained or returned to your home. We would like to think that sometimes when particular powers are given, that all persons act with due care and attention. But we have seen, not too long ago, that immediately a particular policy position was taken. The emphasis shifted from crime solving of any other kind, and it appeared, it may not be so, but it appeared to citizens that traffic violations became the #1 priority. So that when the fines were doubled, when it moved from 12 to 24,000, and 5 to 10,000, and 1 to 2,000, when those things occurred, there was an excitement in the population, and persons responsible for upholding those matters took their job very seriously and took the streets urgently to attend to citizens who were in violation of those particular areas I mentioned. It turns entire neighborhoods into controlled spaces where the citizens' right to move freely becomes subject to executive design. Take protection from arbitrary search and privacy. The bill provides for search and seizure powers exercised without the normal safeguards that citizens may rely on. In a zone, residents can expect heightened stop, searches, and intrusions. Mr. President, the government may argue that these are necessary tools for extraordinary time. I am not for 1 minute downplaying the importance of detection of crime and for the police to be given the authority and all of the resources to do their job. But it does not stop there, Mr. President. You are simply putting a plaster on the wound, because after that period of 180 days, what happens next? How are you getting, somebody criticized a speaker for speaking about the root causes. How do you treat with these problems in these communities if the government does not simultaneously say to this parliament and to this country, we understand that there is a problem, we understand that young people are short of opportunities, and therefore we are going to take and place the investment to make sure that after you do this, so if you want to call it cleanup, that there are opportunities available for the young people instead of playing politics. The last government formed the Ministry of Youth Development and National Service. And Mr. President, I had the privilege of serving as minister in that ministry, so that I can tell you firsthand that in addition to the work of the Ministry of National Security, at this particular ministry, the executive decided to pay particular attention to youth at risk. So the category of youth referred to as NEET, N-E-E-T, which suggests that they are not in any formal employment, they are not in any formal education program, or they have not been exposed to any particular training to equip them for the world of work or for small business. And it's no secret that throughout this country, we rolled out significant programs to give young people that second chance. Mr. President, I visited Barcelona Street recently in East Port of Spain, where it's a community that you may consider at risk, where we refurbished a facility to allow the young men and women from that community who may have difficulties going out of the community for training because of the crime situation in their community or because of economic circumstances where they cannot afford to move to another established training facility. And it pained my heart to see that facility locked up and no plan, nothing in the budget for operationalizing a youth training facility at Basel Street, nothing in the budget for operationalization of a youth training facility in Laventille, nothing in the budget for operating the youth facility refurbished in Malik, nothing in the budget for the youth facility in Point Fortin, nothing in the budget for the youth facility in Palo Seco, nothing in the budget for the youth programs in California, nothing in the budget, Mr. President, to treat with youth development programs and certification for young people so that they can have another chance in life, so that they can prepare themselves for work, so that they can get involved in small business, so that they cannot be so accessible to the criminal element in some of these very communities that the government would like to utilize this legislation for. And for those young people interested in business, Mr. President, we went further. We established a small business grant of $20,000 because we understood we were training and exposing them to certification in particular skilled areas. And then those who could not find employment or those who had a direct interest in going into business, through NEDCO, the government allocated $50 million through a loan. And that program, operated by NEDCO, took these young persons into a short-term training program, exposing them to small business operations, how they can keep their books, how they can develop a business plan. So for instance, if you were exposed to a tailoring program, at the end of that program, you'd need a serger, you need a sewing machine, etc., to set up your small operation, your cottage industry. And instead of, since you can't qualify for a loan, you may have never worked, instead of exposing them to a loan, a small business grant of up to $20,000, that would put young people to work right away to earn a living. It has been scrapped. The money allocated to that program has been moved back to the Ministry of Finance. All of the employees have been sent home, and we have heard nothing about support for the entrepreneurs who want to get in business at that level. I have not heard from the Ministry of Agriculture, however, that they have scrapped the grant of $100,000 to farmers who can access similar grants. I've not heard that at all. No scrapping of the agriculture grant of $100,000. But the small business grant of $20,000 has been summarily dismissed and scrapped by the government. Mr. President, I like the idea that a part of the bill speaks about setting up of this community development, what is it called? There's a committee that is supposed to treat with some of the points I'm raising now. But for the committee to be more than a talk shop, the bill needs to give a bit more teeth. It is called the Social Transformation Committee. And while I'm treating with that, Mr. President, I note that there are several ministers allocated to serve on this committee. I'm not seeing the Minister of Youth and Sport, and maybe that is an oversight on the part of the government, because young people are the heart of the problem we're discussing, and therefore I would think that the Minister of Youth and Sport should be someone serving on this committee. I see as well that at G, it speaks of a representative from the ministry with responsibility for social security And then, I don't know if this is a duplication, at M, it speaks about a representative from the ministry with responsibility for social development. So I don't know if there is a difference or if it is a duplication. I would ask the Honorable Attorney General to take a look at it and see whether that is not something that requires some level of correction. Mr. President, our Constitution already provides a mechanism for occasions of national crisis. Section 7 exists for a reason. It contemplates a formal declaration, a limited duration, parliamentary supervision. It requires transparency and accountability in the use of exceptional powers. This bill sidesteps that framework. Instead of a constitutional emergency procedure with built-in checks, the bill allows the Prime Minister by order to declare a zone in 2 specified circumstances. It permits the Prime Minister to revoke a zone at any time. It allows zones to operate for months with the possibility of an extension. And it does so without requiring immediate parliamentary approval of the initial declaration. Parliament is to be informed afterwards by a statement within 14 days. Mr. President, this should alarm every senator regardless of party affiliation. Because the bill does not have a sunset clause, you know. And sometimes, while in the executive, some may delude themselves that they're going to be there all the time. When you make law for today and for tomorrow. And some previous speaker mentioned that you never know who may sit in that office sometime to come. And this bill has several areas where it can facilitate excesses by the executive, Mr. President. Because once we normalize exceptional powers through ordinary executive orders, we create a permanent pathway around constitutional safeguards. We create a state of emergency in fragments applied to selected communities without the full constitutional discipline that emergencies demand. That brings me to the question of proportionality and justification. This bill invites the suspension of constitutional guarantees in a community for up to 6 months at a time, with extensions possible. This is, in fact, what one would consider an extreme measure. So I ask the government plainly, has the government proven that our current circumstances warrant such an extreme remedy? Where is the case that existing law is so inadequate that we must override our supreme law? Mr. President, exceptional power should never become a substitute for sustained governance. There's a responsibility that a government has to offer good governance to the country. And every issue, no matter how serious it is, cannot be addressed or solved in this way. Crime is not reduced overnight, and it is not reduced by declarations alone. It is reduced by slow, difficult work of strengthening institutions, building intelligence capability, maintaining community trust, supporting effective investigations and prosecutions, and ensuring that witnesses feel protected enough to come forward. It is also reduced by consistent social interventions, particularly for young people who are most vulnerable to being drawn into community activity. Yet, this government, in its last 9 months, I am hopeful that it will be addressed in its months to come. It's early days yet in the government, appears to have withdrawn any effort towards serious youth development. Programs such as the Civilian Conservation Program has just been scrapped. The Youth in Agriculture programs, scrapped. The several youth facilities that are completed, unopened. The several training programs through UTT, ECIAF for the agricultural programs, the several skills training programs that we were given to young people from these very communities free of charge and courtesy of the government, all of these programs have been stopped. And what have we replaced it with? We replaced it with, today, asking the Parliament to approve, to give the executive authority to suspend the rights of citizens to go into these communities, restrict movement, search without a warrant, arrest, detain, seize. And at the same time, we are not prepared to see what investments are we going to make in these communities to give opportunity and hope to the citizens residing in the same. Mr. President, the reality is that extraordinary powers may suppress symptoms of crime for a time, but they do not rebuild the foundations that make communities resilient. That is why this Parliament must be careful and must be cautious. We must ask whether we are responding to crime with the full range of tools available to the state, because the state does have at its disposal the ability to impact these communities positively, and whether we are placing disproportionate weight on coercive measures because they are the ones most visible. Is it that we want to make sure that we are saying we are doing something about crime? It is like the stand your ground legislation, where there are still persons in this country that feel it is okay to draw their licensed firearm and shoot after the individual running out of their yard because of that legislation that was passed, and not understanding that they still would be subject to the law before the courts of Trinidad and Tobago. Security is not achieved by power alone. It is achieved by balance, by continuity, by discipline, and by strengthening the systems that prevent crisis from becoming permanent. Mr. President, the bill also raises serious concerns about the implications for Section 5 rights, particularly due process and liberty. The bill creates a special detention structure in which ordinary liberty is constrained under extraordinary authority. It allows the state to place citizens under an intensified coercive environment that then rely on procedural steps to argue that the due process is preserved. The risk is that the exception becomes the norm, and in a declared zone, the practical reality may be prolonged disruption, repeated stops, repeated searches, fear of movement, fear of gathering, and a sense that citizens' rights depend on where they live. Mr. President, it is well known that there are many businesses that will be interrupted by such action. There are many workers whose ability to go to and from work that will be interrupted. If a curfew is imposed in particular areas, there are certain businesses that will immediately be shut down because they operate after a particular hour. We must be honest about how power operates in real life. When communities are under occupation-style operations, the imbalance between citizen and state grows. Even lawful safeguards can be difficult to exercise. Accessing counsel, seeking relief, making complaints, all become harder when people are living under cordons and curfews and constant security presence. The bill itself recognizes this reality by requiring complaints to be recorded in the station diary, but a recorded complaint is not the same as meaningful redress. And that returns us to the most consequential constitutional issue of all, the deliberate use of Section 13, the special majority override. By relying on that mechanism, the government is asking Parliament to suspend citizens' normal protections on the promise that it will improve security. So in other words, you know we have a crime problem. You know it might be rooted in particular communities. No matter the fact that you are a law-abiding citizen, that you operate within the law, you are now being asked to give up those rights in order for the state to be able to apprehend the so-called criminals within these communities. Is it that under our current laws that is still not possible? One member on the government side spoke about how successful it was sometime in 2017 or 18 when a particular community, namely Enterprise, I don't think he called the name of the particular community, but Enterprise, where he referred to it and said certain type of operations, ZOSO operations, were successfully executed. Is it that the police, under the current circumstances, does not have the right, utilizing its intelligence, to seek warrants and enter the homes of those persons who might be involved in criminal activity, and do the same thing that this bill will allow them to do, except that this bill will also place a significant burden on all of the citizens living within that zone? Because, Mr. President, every encroachment on fundamental rights, even in the name of public safety, sets a precedent. And then this becomes the tool that the police must use to solve crime. That without this also they will not be empowered to do so. Tomorrow, it could be any community deemed inconvenient. Mr. President, we do not accept that the solution to crime is the suspension of constitutional rights in this country. We do not accept that this is the solution. And even, you know, Mr. President, I come from a business family. Some people don't like that. But I come from a business family, proud to. I'm as proud as anybody else who's proud of their ethnicity. I'm proud to be coming from a business family. And at one of these business places, it is a normal custom that if something happens in the community, that because CCTV footage is in place, the police will come and ask for access to the CCTV footage. And in the last 25 years, there's been no occasion on which the management has said no to the police. Because you're all interested in assisting the police in doing their work. But then the politics steps in. I was in this parliament a couple of weeks ago when I looked at my phone and saw a message that the police, all 18 of them in a maxi taxi, heavily armed, had moved into one of these business places on a warrant. What was the warrant for? To access CCTV footage. 18 policemen heavily guarded. And at the same moment that I received that message from the management there, a member of the government on the other side was mouthing to me that there's police in your business place. At the same time. How could that be possible, Mr. President? And therefore it causes us, we must consider, when you put this kind of authority in the hands of politicians, when you put that kind of authority in the hands of politicians who are prepared to use it in this way, it has to be of concern to us. I have a copy of the document. I'll share it with the public at any point in time. But what was it intended to do? It was intended to create political drama. It was intended because they prevented business customers from going in, asked the customers who were there to leave, and caused a political drama to have some shadow. And that type of activity must cause us pause In this country, Mr. President, there are people in the government actively urging people in the police to take action against members of the government on all sorts of frivolous issues. Members of the opposition, sorry. And therefore, when we pass legislation like this, we must take concern. Yes. We must have concern, Mr. President. And so, Mr. President, on behalf of all the right-thinking citizens of this country, on behalf, the Senate is not here. The purpose, the reason why we have this type of legislature is not to rubber stamp policy positions of the executive. The executive was elected and quite properly must come to the parliament with policy positions. That is the job that the executive was given by the citizens of this country. I have no criticism of the government for coming with a policy. What I hold true to is that the fact that you have the executive, you have separation of powers, and the executive must come to the legislature to enact legislation. Every senator in this parliament has a right to look at his legislation and give just due to the oath that they swore. Conscientiously serve the citizens without fear or favor. And so today, Mr. President, while I know, in winding up, that we do have an issue with crime in this country, that we do need to have opportunities in place. At the committee stage, I intend to raise an amendment, that we do have urgent need for the government, just as urgent as bringing this legislation, to invest or to indicate to this country what are the steps that they're going to put in place for youth development in Trinidad and Tobago, and stop hiding behind audit and audit and audit to shut everything down. If you find a problem, you are in government, deal with the problem. But just as you have denied the citizens, the young citizens, access to the lands in Chatham, you have not denied the former Caroni workers the lands in Couva. I rest myself.
The Honourable Minister in the Ministry of Housing, Science and Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. President. To hear PNM talk about trust and lecture us about trust, PNM and trust is an oxymoron. The people do not trust the PNM. That's 28-13, April 28. The people do not trust the PNM, 15-0 in Tobago. The people do not trust the PNM. Half a full Queen's Hall for 70th anniversary. No shame to come here and talk trust. The people have dealt with y'all because they do not trust y'all. That contribution by the Honourable Senator from the PNM and all the other contributions from the PNM are not oxymoronic, they're just simply moronic. I have never sat here and heard more nonsense. Imagine a senator quoting from the Constitution, Section 4, and all of a sudden he believes that he leaves out
Mr. President, Standing Order 46-4. The member is using unparliamentary language to describe other members of this chamber.
Just guide me on the language that was used.
Describe contributions as moronic.
Yeah, but is that moronic? I haven't seen that anywhere. Overruled, let's go.
Mr. President, for my honorable colleague, I withdraw the word moronic. It's vacuous, asinine, and ridiculous. The Honorable Senator Foster Cummins, who talked about trust, I do not even trust that the Honorable Senator wrote his own contribution because he was reading there. And we know that he has a proclivity towards plagiarism, because while he was reading that, he read the Constitution, Section 4. He quoted all the rights. This document is not designed vacuously.
46.4 and 46.6.
Yeah, I think I want to sustain that. So please, if you want to raise the conduct or you want to raise anything on the put, let's deal with it properly. Cool.
It's just happened to you, but I will move on. That's en passant. But anyway, the honorable senator quoted from the Constitution, Section 4. But just by mistake, he left out the first right. He read and he told us about the right to liberty, to security of the person, enjoyment of property. But he left out the first one, and those who have a copy, take it out. The first right enshrined in this Constitution is Section 4A, the right of the individual to life. But you leave out that and read all sorts of things, because that's the dishonesty of the PNM. The right to life. You can disturb me, boy. $500 million cannot make me arch. So now they understand that the dishonesty of them. We are here to debate life. We are here to stop the bloodshed. We are here because of the failure for 10 years of the PNM to institute anything and any institution to keep our people safe. He spoke about the ordinary life in communities that are at risk. What is that ordinary life? Because we live here. I don't know about them, but I live on the ground. I can go anywhere, sit down anywhere at any time, whether Mango Rose up in Malabar, Carapo, down in anywhere down on the train line, and sit down and talk with you. That's what I do. So I don't know what they're talking about. The ordinary life of people in these communities, that they are all of a sudden saying that the police presence will be such a dramatic a manifestation of oppression in these communities. They do not understand. People are under oppression right now. They're under siege. They cannot move. They're afraid of their children. They cannot play football in the street like we used to play and stub with toe. They cannot play cricket. They cannot come outside. The gangs have overtaken these, and for anybody to come in the Senate and bring this disingenuous argument that safety and security will stop ordinary life in these communities is not life at all. It is closer to death. And to hear people who live in gated communities, behind armed barriers, with security in boot, with community comfort patrol paid for, with armed security driving around, with air horn and CCTV cameras locked away, with police patrol. People who live in those communities saying that people in other communities would not want that. How come? So if you want it, why they wouldn't want it? Why the nurse wouldn't want to walk out on the road and see police officers and see security when she's going to take a car to go for an early morning shift? Why would she not feel secure? Why must she go out there and be afraid? Y'all come here and y'all talk like we inside some air-conditioned building with nice suit, but y'all don't live and talk reality. It was hard to sit down for 3 days and hear some of these arguments. It is so ridiculous to hear the Honorable Senator Foster Cummings of the PNM talking about he was there and he did so much. He gave the children an opportunity to get a $20,000 loan to build a business. Why you didn't take the $20,000 and give them the $500 million? He said people are running down things that are vexatious and frivolous. Yes, frivolous. Corruption, 4.1 million, venture credit union, no procurement, businesses of a man who says he swore on the Bible to take care of the country and he took care of himself and his family, talking to us here about opportunities for the youth. You know how much opportunities the youth's gonna get with a $500 million? Then they brought
Mr. President, I rise on Standing Order 46. 4 and 6. The senator is imputing improper motives.
All right. Honorable Senators, I would say that if you want to raise matters concerning the conduct of any member of this House, let us do it properly. Okay? So just be guided.
Thank you. Then we move on to Senator Faris 2.0. Senator Boodoo came to say and talk about the rights, the constitutional rights and the freedoms and the process. Well, I want the 624 people who were victims of murder to read your contribution later this evening. When they could do that, then you could eliminate the number one right, which is the life, and stop the bloodshed. There were 624 murders in 2024, the last full year of your government, and you come in here to preach about what we should do and how we should give the judiciary resources. You are a lawyer. I used to have such great respect for lawyers. I thought lawyers had to be brilliant, amazing, study hard, diligent, analytical. And then I listened to these PNM lawyers, and I know any dum-dum could be a lawyer.
Except on this side.
The law reforms zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, Bill 2026. It's not about games. It's about keeping our people safe, keeping our children safe. I now get into some of the contributions from before. The Honorable Senator Candace Jones-Simmons. It's the first time in my life, Honorable Senator, that someone has told me to my face what I am listening to and what I am not hearing. I did not know that. But let me say that I listen to everything, every word and every point. And it's a bit disingenuous for you to tell me what I'm listening to and I'm not. You do not know. You cannot know. So I assure you that I listen to everybody's contribution. They were from, I don't know, I didn't want to say that part, but I would say it because I'm in a good mood. Maybe the Honorable Senator knows what I am listening to while I'm sitting here quietly listening, because maybe she spent too much time in Tobago in a red jersey. Maybe it is that, I do not know. Now, 48 out of 64 years, the Honorable Senator said that we should talk about...
Mr. President, Standing Order 46.6. That is a clear imputation of an improper motive.
No, overrule. Continue, please.
I don't know, they feel like it disturb me. You must know who debated. You could get up and down like Jack in the Box whole day, do squats. Maybe he didn't go in the gym, but he have a time to talk after. But I would also say to the Honorable Senator, you talked about zones of opportunities. But you see, life doesn't begin when a PNM president appoints a president senator and you come here. Life begins when you take interest in what exists. Because if you know about opportunities, you would know that that government, that PNM government, between September 2015 and April 2025, you don't want to know what opportunities they cut? Let me help you. The PNM cut sport funding from the NPI vote from 140 million down to 10 million. That's less opportunity. They cut Football Pro League, less opportunity, from 18 million down to 3 million annually, less opportunity. National Super League, they cut all the funding for the youths and them to play the football, less opportunity. They cut PAN in schools. They cut Panorama stipend from 1,000 to 500. They cut prize money for PAN. They took PAN man land away from PAN man. They rent PNM Minister building for 50,000 more than what they were renting an ex-man building for. They cut sport camps for 20,000 young children every July, August holidays. They cut that for 8 years. That's a zone of no opportunity. That is PNM. So you see, when you come to debate, you must know what existed, what was there, what opportunities were taken away, and where we are going. They cut funding, they're stopping there now. They cut funding, and those sport camps included the differently abled. If you talk to the differently abled and the communities of Special Olympics, they will cry for those sports camps with great coaches. They cut the sport development officers at the Ministry of Sport. 75 of them used to go around the country teaching, identifying talent, injecting discipline, building self-esteem. They cut that. You are not aware. They cut the sport caravans that were going around between 2010 and 2015 in rural communities looking for talent coaching, putting science in it. You didn't know that. They cut school feeding from 76,000 breakfasts, and them like breakfasts, but 76,000 breakfasts and 76,000 lunches under Tim Gopi Singh. They cut that down before COVID to 48,000. Them cut food in children's belly, and you come to tell us about opportunity. We are aware, we are involved, and we will fix it. They cut funding to UTT. They cut out programs in UTT. They cut and closed down 5 MIC centers, closed down 6 NESC centers. Were you aware of that? They cut baby milk grant to feed children, right? Baby milk, key generation, cognitive development, fats, lipids, and so on, so they could be intelligent. Them cut that from poor people. So don't come and preach to me about zones of opportunity. The opportunity arrived on April 28th because we got rid of the PNM. We want to diversify the economy. Did you know they closed down THTTI, that's the Hotel Institute? So they want to bring sandals, but there are nobody to walk in the sandals. So it's best we wear slippers. They closed down Nursing Academy in El Socorro. That was built by Kamla Prasad Visesa and transformed the Ministry of Youth. They 3,200 nurses between 2011 and 2015. They closed that down. Lack of opportunity. They cut food card. Food for people from 42,000 in September 2015 down to 18,000. You see, you didn't know. I know you might be bored, it might hurt you, but when you come to debate and lecture, you have to research and have information, or else it becomes oppressive and people have trouble listening. But I listen good, you see? I heard everything you said. They shut down Petrotrain, well, all them jobs that went, you know that? So therefore, I would then move on to another point. And I thank my brother, I forget his name, but he's on a blog, Opinion Box. Because the next thing some of you all senators said, but the stigma. These also, if you put security in an area, it will stigmatize the community. Okay. Well, let me read from an article, Sean Douglas, Monday, 24 June 2019. The headline is, Prime Minister in 2019, who was that? Keith Christopher Rowley. He says the Coast Guard will run the Laventille pool. Let's hear what this honorable PNM Prime Minister said about the people of Laventille. Since this government is trying to protect people, and all of a sudden now, we're going to create, manufacture, endorse, encourage a stigma. Let's read. So the Prime Minister is sitting down there, the former, and the former next to each other, right? The Prime Minister said the new Laventille Community Swimming Facility will be run by the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force, the Coast Guard, and the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. And so it will be secure. Rowley said, Laventille had been so stigmatized by indiscipline and violence that the new pool would within 3 months be taken over by frogs and be full of green water if not properly run. That is a Prime Minister of the PNM talking down to his constituents and telling them that they are no good. They are not worthy to run a pool that is a little cheap 25-meter, 6-lane nonsensical pool. That they're not worthy to run it efficiently. Then he ran it into the ground and frogs went in it because he did not give the resources. That is stigmatization. That is when your leader tells you that you are no good. And what? Because he looked like them? That's the most disingenuous, ridiculous, uninspiring statement made. And that was the PNM. That's what they do. That's how they keep their communities. And now you're saying that me and this government on this side would stigmatize people. We are here to uplift all people, provide opportunity and safety for all, not only some. Rowley continued, it requires management and discipline and inputs from the Defense Force, the Coast Guard, and the Police Service to ensure this is a safe neighborhood. Avoid conflict, said Rowley, and fights, so this would not be an unpleasant place for your children. Rowley promised to instruct Finance Minister Carl Mimba to allocate extra funds to the Defense Force. Where the funds? Zone of opportunity, zone of lies of the PNM. They did not give any funds. The pool has been down for 18 months. Frog in it, the children cannot swim. It was closed on Friday at 4 p.m. till Monday 8 a.m. anyway. So a nonsensical waste of money and games played by PNM or with people's lives. We don't play game with people's lives. We come here to save people's lives. Things not perfect, but we're not allowing people to die just like that. The Prime Minister reckoned he could count on everyone to make sure the water stays clean and the facilities open. I can't read that, I just laugh. And that was a PNM Prime Minister. They have no shame to come here and talk in the Senate. But I can tell you, the United National Congress is powerful, and I know that. I know not only from the victory in the election, I know it because every time I sit down here in the Senate, I see a UNC reject make it to the elite in the PNM one time. We pelt out Lalale, he's a PNM senator. We pelt out Obika, he's a PNM senator. They never had nobody. So our rejects is them best. That's why they're on that side. Imagine I just sit down and listen to the son of Njak praise the PNM. The son of Njak, Geddes Granger, Macandal Daga, and all the brothers who were fighting for equality of black people, they were fighting against who? PNM. Who was the government from 1956 to 1986 unfettered? PNM. Who was the 1970 Black Power Revolution? Who that was against? PNM. The PNM. And they come in here like they want to rewrite history. I wouldn't bother with him, but I really know why we rejected him. His contribution was quite pathetic. Senator McNish, I would tell you that I agree with you. The PNM is a zone of failure, whether Anaconda, Baghdad, Sleepy Hines, whatever you want to call it, total, complete failure because they are only about policies of superficiality. So we agree. So this is not the be-all and end-all, but as we said, this is a suite of legislation and practices and implementation that we will attack the most heinous criminals, the most heinous oppressive situation. So we agree with you. But the COVID lockdown and so on, yes, that cut down the crime situation, but we do not expect that this will be forever, because as we get involved, as we realize that we have to rebuild the treasury that the PNM vacuum out, they didn't pay their bills, and now they come here to say, we are desperate to generate revenue, when all over every ministry you see, $1 billion wasn't paid here, 450 million here, 850 million. We will handle that, and simultaneously, we will recoup money to invest in young people and give them the opportunities that were taken away from them by the PNM. Well, Senator Dan Ball, I know they have a virus going around, but the virus brought the PNM even lower down because they brought Senator Boodoo to replace him. But Senator Dan Paul was a permanent secretary in the Ministry of Finance and a Minister of Finance for Akobo Sweat for 1 month. But yes, he came here and regaled us with a fantasy about Dudas and the IMF, and that this was somehow, some way, a methodology to bring in the IMF. It is so nonsensical, so fantastical. You should have go movie, tongue and paper to watch Avatar rather than to come here and talk that kind of nonsense. He talked about 2011 statistics, but we in 2026. That is the PNM. They are back in times. Them still believe Dr. Williams alive. He implied that a central hotspot, but it wouldn't happen. Wherever the hotspot is, wherever is needed, wherever citizens need safety and security, and they are crying out for it, they will get it because everybody deserves it. Well, I love carnival, I love mass, I love pan. As a Douglas, I don't have too much rhythm all the time, but that's okay, because the African part does go to the base and the Indian part does go to the heights, and sometimes you get confused, but that's okay. Carnival is about everybody. But to hear Senator Dan Paul, who I never see no carnival ban no way, telling me that the all-inclusive experience let the people coming down the hills to rob people is abject, total fallacy, nonsense, and concoction. He then tell me about some rapper called Furious Five. I don't know where he came out from at that time. Senator Michael de la Bastide. So, I heard you and you said you like debate. So I too like debate. And you came out quite scathing. It looked like your feelings were hurt by the words of the Honorable Prime Minister. And you took great offense. And you came out to ridicule the Honorable Prime Minister in your contribution and laugh at some of the words he used. But let me assure you, first and foremost, sir, that the Honorable Prime Minister has a mandate from the people of Trinidad and Tobago. She received, in order to take care of this country and to promote her policy for safety, security, and economic diversification, 358,000 votes. With all due respect, sir, you were selected by a PNM president and you did not get any mandate. You were selected by one human being. You cannot believe for a moment that a prime minister who has the endorsement of 358,000...
Mr. President, Standing Order 46-8.
I don't think we should bring the president into our debate at all. Okay.
I agree, sir, because the president will be ashamed that he is a PNM, so I agree with that. I withdraw. So the problem is that we must understand the assignment, because the mere fact that a president senator selected would be so emotional, so hurt because of some words from a prime minister who has a mandate and whose job it is to ensure that she gets and fulfills her promises made to the people. It shows that somewhere along the line, we've lost the script, we've lost the plot, because if a prime minister brings legislation here on the backs of 358,000 votes, it is quite arrogant for one person or 9 people selected by one person to believe that there is some sort of equity in a democracy. And if you read the Constitution and every institution that we have, the preponderance of power and essence of legitimacy comes from the mandate of the people. The voice of the people is the voice of God, and the voice of the people says, we elect Kamala to keep us safe. We elect the member for Superior to keep us safe. So anyone who does not have the maturity to understand that, hear those words, listen to them, absorb them, and not get emotional, then maybe you have taken a position that you're not suited for. And just let's be clear, because there was a statement being made that the president's senators are somehow independent. No. There's only 2 presidents that were active politicians in our history where there was a vote or it was a contest. That was A.N.R. Robinson and the now president. This president was elected only by the votes of the PNM. All others, from Ellis Clark, Noor Hassan Ali, George Maxwell Richards, Anthony Carmona, Paula May Weeks, were unanimously selected by the Electoral College, and therefore an impression or a perception of impartiality was there. But that does not exist in this case. This case, it was a partisan vote. One side voted for the president and one side voted for Israel Khan, who lost. So to think that somehow the principles of apparent bias, conflict of interest, and so on fail to apply because you all determined that it doesn't, doesn't sit well with me. The principles apply to any and everyone. And if you are selected by someone who has a proclivity or affiliation or an intimacy with one side, it is reasonable to think that you too may have that. You may not actually, but we're not talking about actual bias. We're talking about apparent. And then if we go further, we could even investigate actual. So if an honorable prime minister makes this point,
For the first time in the entire time that I have been in this Senate, I wish to take a point of order. In fact, several. Section 46.4, Section 46.6, Section 46.7. Not only, I think the most opposite one is 46.6. No senator shall make an imputation of improper motives against any member or an offensive reference to a member's private affairs. There's a clear imputation of an improper motive on the part of one of the independent senators on this bench, and I think that that is out of order, and I ask you, Honorable President, to direct the members speaking accordingly.
All right, I think I'm going to sustain those points, and I'll ask my colleague to just come back in back.
I forgive the member, she was not here. I'm just responding to a discussion and an argument proffered by the independent senator. I did not impute any improper motive, so I'm not understanding if my English is not clear. I am speaking about simple principles. I'm speaking about simple principles. And Mr. Tight Pants, if your brain is not getting oxygen, you could sit there and be quiet. So we continue.
Please. Let's, hello, I'm on my legs. Please, silence. Let us not get into personal bantering, please. It doesn't help. Please, continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. But the point that I'm making is, Honorable Senator said, for example, that we did not consult. And he went to great pains to say that we were irresponsible, disrespectful, and that we didn't come to consult. But I put it to you, Honorable Senator, that our entire job involved consultation. You are selected. We walked this country for 10 years. We walked the hotspot areas. We talked to people in the thousands. We have consulted for 10 years while the PNM ravaged the treasury and decimated our country and our economy. We have consulted. We have asked the people for their mandate. And the policies of Kamla Persad Bissessar are based on that. We did not sit for someone to select us out of the Queen's Park Oval to come here to sit down to dictate to others who have walked the ground and have gotten the votes of the people.
Mr. President, I rise to raise Section 42.9 or Rule 42.9, Standing Order 42.9.
Well, after you go clarify. No, he'll clarify after, no problem. Mr. President.
Yes. Please, stop, please. Stop the crosstalk, please. Yeah. At the end of his statement. At the end of his statement, continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. I mean, some of them who are Attorney General don't even know the standing orders. That's why he brought so much poor legislation that get overturned in the courts every minute. Let me just say, Mr. President, for example, in the last 10 years, and I'm going to talk for myself, if I walked once per week, 3 hours every Saturday, I would touch at least 120 to 150 citizens' hands and speak to them, listen to them. By 52 weeks, that's 7,800 citizens. By 10 years, that's 78,000 citizens, minus some if you repeat meeting somebody twice and so on. At spot meetings, Monday Night Forum, as the Douglas, the UNC senator, daily interactions by the double stand in the grocery, in the pharmacy. This is at least 3,650 people per year. By 10 years. That's another 36,500 people. Functions, fetes, sporting events, 1 per month, 100 people per event times 12 by 10 years, 12,000 more people. A grand total of 126,500 people consulted with, listening to, hearing, and then formulating policy. Press conferences, social media presence, doubles and coffee, interviews, are than more thousands of people. So for senators who are selected and we never saw them before to come and attack the government and attack MPs and attack senators and attack politicians, you don't understand our job. I prefer you to come and say, how did you get here? I'm not sure how you got here, but I know how we got here. The people voted for us. And those numbers were just for me, Mr. President. For the Honorable Kamla Persad-Bissessar, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, multiply that by 10. So she has consulted, she has demanded, and she wants to keep her promise to the people. And Senator Lewis, I make that argument to let you know. It's too much power in the hands of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister has asked and earned the right to listen and to impact the people's lives. So for us to sit down, and you always start all of your contributions by saying, I haven't been here long, I have just arrived, I am just here. Kamla Persad-Bissessar has been there for 40 years, walking and talking and working. So please, give a little bit of respect. She didn't reach there by magic. Understand that, because it's very difficult to sit down and listen when you have not walked in the shoes of those who stand here. We could debate, but even now I could see that some of you all getting touchy. But when you all sit down and talk, I didn't jump up on those standing orders because I come to debate. I ain't afraid debate, and I certainly ain't afraid them in the front there. That's why them. The honorable member with a good name, Senator Melanie Roberts Rajman, said we criticized the PNM methodology in crime fighting. We did no such thing because the PNM had no methodology. Senator John Bates said that we suspend rights in the name of safety and security. Well, that one, I nearly fall off my chair and I was sitting down. I had to listen and read it over, because I thought I took my notes wrong. We suspend rights in the name of safety and security. So when else you should suspend rights? Life. You are alive. I'm looking at you. You are sitting there listening. That's life. Without life, we cannot debate. We cannot live. We cannot look at our children and be proud. This bill here is to protect life. That's all. Don't go into any other old talk, because once you're dead, and it wasn't your former Prime Minister say, who dead? Well, who dead can't debate? As a father, I would suspend, because you also said you brought up fatherhood and parents, and somebody senators. As a father, I am telling you that I would suspend all the rights of my children to ensure their safety. All. If I want to ensure my children safe, stay home, you ain't going nowhere. No vet, no shopping, even no sport. If it's a risk to your safety, I would do anything and everything to keep my children safe. There would even be no school. If my child was being bullied, I would not send my child to school. So I don't know what we're debating here. This is a bill to keep people safe, to save lives, to stop people from being bullied by criminal gangs that have taken over. You sit down and we lime and we go to cocktail parties, but you do not walk the streets. You do not understand. The people want this. The people want safety. The people want to live as if they're in Goodwood Park, as if they're in Newbury Hill, as if they're in Mary Avenue. They want a security guard. They want community comfort patrol. When the police drive wrong, don't you all feel safe when you see a police car in your neighborhood? You may be outside watering the plants. Don't you feel safe? Already? Hold on. Abuse of power arguments are made. And yes, anywhere power is given, there is the risk of abuse. We saw a possible recent example of that. And we will await the investigation into that. But for the PNM to pretend like only them are upset if police abuse their power, that is ridiculous. Anybody who abuses their power has to be reeled in, has to be monitored. That is a risk, and we must mitigate against it. But do not say that we must not keep people safe and keep them alive because there may be some bad police. Well, look in here. Let me shut down the Senate because it have some bad senators of the PNM there, so we just shut it down. They have a former PNM minister who used his power and influence for his family to benefit from over $500 million in contracts. Isn't that an abuse of power? Wherever people get power in over history, there are abuses of power. Another former PNM minister used his power to get rental for his building without the correct approvals. Isn't that abuse of power? Should we stop all rentals from everybody? Or should we just zone in on those who break the law? There's a teacher in 1969 who had power over the children and used that power to impregnate a girl of school age. What about that? Anywhere there are people who have power, we have to be vigilant. So yes, the police have been given power, but the police already have great power. In 2021, when we saw that video up in Laventille with the gold teeter, there was no state of emergency. There were no special powers, but the police appeared to do everything wrong, and they have to be dealt with, and I believe some were suspended, and that case might be still investigation pending. But of course, anytime to whom much is given, much is expected. So yes, we will have to monitor the police. That is the job of the Commissioner of Police, the PCA, the Ministry of Defense, and so on, of course. But you cannot say that all the police bad, because that's not true. One minute. Ooh. Well, they brought race into this thing. Well, you know, the Douglas don't mind talking race, because I'm a proud African from Tobago by my father, and a proud East Indian, very proud East Indian from my sari-wearing mother. And when I used to go to stores, but I come from a different place, because I never understood anything about race, because my whole life was just everybody live. And I used to go in stores, and all the clerks and the people helping would ask me, is that your mother? Because she had 3 boys with little afro, and I had hair and thing. And I never understood what they were talking about. But it's only when interacting with the PNM and the superficial race baiting that I understand what the people were asking me. They could not believe, even though my face is exactly that of my mother's, they could not believe by the texture of my hair and the color of my skin that that was my mother in the sari. And we have to get away from that. We have to live like Douglas. We have to live free of race. This is not about race. This is about safety. This is about our children are dying, stopping the bloodshed. So we ask for your support. We don't beg for it. We don't go to hug up for it, but we ask for it.
Senator Michael De La Voisin.
Mr. President, the goodly senator suggested that I, in my contribution, stated that the government was disrespectful to us, the independent bench and the opposition senators, in not consulting with us before the bill. I certainly never said those words. I certainly never stated anything that would suggest that they were being disrespectful to us. What I suggested was that a better approach would be to consult with us before the bill and see whether in order to obtain our support, instead of throwing insults and that sort of thing. That's all, man.
Dr. Avery Brown. Senator Dr. Avery Brown.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, the context has been set. There have been many contributions in this debate, and I want to recognize from the onset of my presentation that there's considerable national interest in this discourse taking place in the Parliament of Trinidad and Tobago. the attention of the public and those outside of the precincts of the Parliament, I would believe is quite rightfully focused on this debate because the stakes are very high, and in my humble opinion, certainly since the beginning of this session of Parliament, the stakes have never been higher. The government has come to us today and last week and before in what is now an extended debate, asking for something extraordinary. They've come with an extraordinary proposal. And Mr. President, I've been around for a little while, and I've participated in a number of special majority debates. And I have to confess to you my surprise at the tone, the nature, the content, the attitude, and interface coming from the government bench in this particular debate. The context and the backdrop set by none other than the Prime Minister herself. I do not need to regale the Senate of the words of the Prime Minister because they've been shared by some of those preceding me. But to see contributors on the government bench in the Senate, senators, not just reinforcing, but doubling down on that attitude is stunning, Mr. President, when this government is expecting the votes of senators in a special majority vote. Mr. President, I listened painfully to Senator Roberts a short while ago, and it appeared, just as before, to be a case of selectees attacking selectees because they are selected.
Mr. President.
Yes.
Mr. President, I rise on Standing Order 46-1. His contribution so far is totally irrelevant to what is before us. It's totally irrelevant.
Yeah, I'm giving him the opportunity and sound to develop his point. Continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. My goodness. Appears the member was asleep during the preceding contribution. Mr. President, I thank you for setting the environment for free speech in the Parliament. I will continue. Mr. President, so a selectee is standing up here shouting and berating other senators simply on the basis that they are also selectees. Mr. President, that belies and betrays a fundamental misunderstanding on the part of Senator Roberts and the Prime Minister of this country, a fundamental misunderstanding of the Constitution of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. And if it is the expectation that Senator Alwari, Senator Cummings, Senator De La Bastide, Senator Lewis, or any other senator would just turn up here to rubber stamp or automatically agree or endorse any measure brought by the executive, tells me that this is a government completely out of control. The very purpose of this Parliament is to provide oversight over the executive, Mr. President. What could be more fundamental than that? And then they accuse us of lecturing. I heard, and I was a little flattered, an independent senator is now also being accused of lecturing. Apparently that is the label ascribed to some of we are lecturing. Mr. President, if a contribution might be delivered in respectful and rational tones, and if the content
Mr.
does
President,
not include
46-1, he's going on too long on that. Let him get on with the debate.
Yeah. Continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, if a contribution is lacking in insults and invective and personal attack, if that is what makes levels an accusation of being a lecture, I'm guilty as charged, because you will get none of that from the bench of the People's National Movement, Mr. President. None of it. And then the senator who preceded me gave a long, meandering attack on the basis of corruption and on the basis of misuse of state resources. And I sat here waiting patiently for some application of his 40 minutes to give this nation some insights into the architecture and the workings of the Live Sport program, which fell under the Ministry of Sport in times past. We got not a single word or wink from him in that particular regard, Mr. President. And I thought that was worth noting in this particular debate. Mr. President, no matter how they twist it, they are asking us to replace a state of emergency, which is currently ongoing, which still exists in Trinidad and Tobago, to replace that, which they claim is not related to the crime situation, with their new formulation, which is a zones of special operation, which curtails the constitutional rights of some citizens of Trinidad and Tobago based on geography. Citizens of their choosing based on geography. And Mr. President, in my respectful view, this bill collapses from the very first reference. Because I see some of my colleagues maybe yielding to the temptation, and I want to say it very clearly, of saying, well, listen, there's a bill before us, and let's work together to try to make it the best possible law. So let's amend, let's tweak, etc. But when, Mr. President, the first test, before we even get there, is has the government made a cogent case for the need for these measures in the first place? And that case has not been made. And that's why they've been shouting and bullying and badgering and insulting and berating. They have failed to make that simple prima facie case. Mr. President, I want to start right at clause 6.1 in part 2.
Mr. President, I rise on standing order 46.6, imputing improper motive against any member, offensive reference to members. The member there is speaking about the conduct of us on this side, about bullying and badgering, when that is not something that we have been doing. That's offensive.
I want to sustain that point. Point of order, please. Do not. No, take a seat. I'm sustaining that point of order, and I am asking you, don't go down that road. Continue, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I had already moved on to clause 6.1 of this bill, part 2, zone of special operations. And the entire case of this government collapses right here. Where there are reasonable grounds to believe. Mr. President, that should be cause for pause for anyone in this country. Everything hinges around this phrasing. Everything else in the bill flows from here. Where there are reasonable grounds to believe. And believe by who? The Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. This is the first time I've participated in a debate that even approaches the reality of giving the Prime Minister of this republic such extraordinary powers. Indeed, Mr. President.
This is the standing order 53(1)B. This is tedious repetition now. We've been going through this Prime Minister talk for the last...
Okay. Yeah. I think this is the problem that we are entering into a phase of tedious repetition. 6.1 has been repeatedly articulated, and you are just repeating arguments that have already gone. And that's the problem when we come too late in this debate. So I sustain the point made by the Honorable Senator, and I ask you to move on from 6.1. We have heard 6.1 for the last 4 days, right? Go on to some other point. I'm warning people, whoever is speaking after, do not engage in tedious repetition. I'll warn you once, and I'll warn you twice. After that, you resume your seat. Okay? No tedious repetition. Continue, please.
Mr. President, I use the phrase, and I know the government is very uncomfortable, I use the phrase, the case has collapsed, because this government has exerted considerable energy in trying to convince this population that crime is down in Trinidad and Tobago. Crime is down, murders are down in Trinidad and Tobago. I saw an article dated December 16, 2025 in the Trinidad Guardian claiming that homicides are down by 66% in the urban Port of Spain division. That is the case this government has been making consistently during the state of the emergency. But somehow, by magic, by osmosis, they expect this Senate to believe that there's some alarming, unusual, emergency reality that would justify the granting of these emergency powers to the Prime Minister. Mr. President, the case has not been made. That's why I use the phrase, and I respectfully to the senator who intervened, it's not a repetition. I'm giving my own perspective as a senator on this particular debate. But I am guided. Mr. President, no matter how they twist it, this bill will affect a range of constitutional rights that all of our citizens are entitled to. The constitutional right to free movement, enjoyment of property, protection from arrest and arbitrary search, and due process. The point is this, Mr. President, in a democracy, the presumption of your innocence should never, ever depend on where you live. Let me repeat that, Mr. President. In a democracy, the presumption of your innocence and the protection of the Constitution should never, ever depend on where you live. So this is a very right-wing and unusual approach. Mr. President, I want to tell you, and it has not been raised in this debate at all, I want to tell this Senate and those who are paying attention that this is not the first time. This is not the first time this government, this UNC, has attempted this type of measure. Mr. President, I draw to your attention the reality that took place in the year 2011 and I refer to a newspaper article, the Trinidad Guardian by Reshma Raghunath, on the 21st of August 2011. The headline is instructive. Prime Minister declares limited state of emergency. What was that about? There was a lot of attention around that phrase, limited state of emergency. And this is the contents of the article, Mr. President. Last night, Persad Bissessar, referring to the Honorable Prime Minister at the time, after an emergency meeting with members of the National Security and her cabinet at her private Philippine San Fernando residence, interesting location for the meeting, said, the limited state of emergency will take place from midnight tonight, that night. A tough-talking Persad Bissessar, backed by the Chief of Defense Staff, etc., said, this is not an easy decision to make. It is not a light thing to trigger Section 8(1) of our Constitution, but when the circumstances call for it, I believe it's the right thing to do. The article went on. I won't read the entire thing, Mr. President. And I'm quoting, while she shied away from revealing the areas identified as hotspots, the Trinidad Guardian understands that 11 communities have been named in the limited state of emergency. And then the article outlines what the president himself signed at the time. What did she then do, Mr. President? there was the arrest of over 8,000 individuals.
Mr. President, I rise on standing order. Mr. President.
Listen, I notice a tendency developing. When a member rises on a point of order, the member who is speaking immediately takes a seat. You can't have the member speaking, standing, and the member who is raising the point of order standing. That is going to create disorder in the chamber. So may I advise, kindly advise, that when a member rises on a point of order, the member who is speaking, resume your seat and let the member proceed with this point of order. Senator, I recognize you.
Thank you most kindly, Mr. President. Mr. President, and rise on standing order 46.5. The honourable member, while reading the article, continued to refer to the honourable Prime Minister by her name and by referring to her as she. Would like the honourable member, when he's delivering and he takes ownership of the article and he addressed the honourable Prime Minister by the right title, that is to be used in the debate. Thank you.
I'm sure you are going to be guided by that, so just refer to the Prime Minister by her proper title.
Mr. President, I also rise on 46.4 and or 46.6. I don't know if the member was quoting or what he was quoting from. If it's the Guardian, it does make a difference. But he said something about the Prime Minister arresting somebody. The Prime Minister never doesn't arrest people.
You want to clarify that point?
Thank you, Mr. President. I never said what Prime Minister has a power of arrest. Mr. President, I'm going to move on because I know what they are about completely in this matter, Mr. President. Mr. President, 2 days later, the Law Association had cause to intervene in this matter. The Law Association, and you see the attacks continue. It's very unpersuasive. The Trinidad Express, on August 23rd, this was August 21st, now in August 23rd, 2011, the title of this article, the caption is, Law Association, there's no such thing as limited state of emergency. And to summarize, I will quote, the Council of the Law Association says it expects the government will apprise citizens of this country before the state of emergency expires of the impact of the measures. And this is Mr. President, if Senator, what's his name? Philip Alexander. Mr. President, this senator, if I could respond to his contribution, stood here and gave us an attempt to sanctify his resume. He's an activist, he's an activist, he's an activist. Now he's coming here to disturb me.
Mr. President, 46.4, insulting, offensive.
May I appeal? Because, I have the power, which I do not use. I pride myself as being a Democrat. So I ask members, let us reduce the crosstalk. A member is speaking, allow him to speak. If there's a point of order, you rise, I'll recognize, and rule. But we cannot have this excessive, continuous cross-talking. It disturbs the proceedings, and it shows disrespect to this chamber. So I'm appealing to members to allow the member to speak, and if you have any problems, rise on the point of order. Continue, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President,
I rise on 46.4. By both of them, and while you were speaking, Senator Al-Rawi was saying the most disgusting things about me. And that is not the first time they've done it, both of them. I was not given the opportunity that I gave Senator Bodu.
Okay. Okay, just have a seat. I didn't hear. I must admit to you, Senator Alexander, I did not hear any remarks being made by Senator Al-Wari towards you. If you wish, you can put it in writing, and we'll do an audio check to see if it confirms what you have said. But I didn't hear, and I don't want anyone to repeat what he would have said that I didn't hear. So at this time, continue, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, if I could be allowed to complete my point in respect of my freedom of speech in this Senate, it is this. The Council, in a statement yesterday signed by its president, Senior Counsel Dana Sitahal, is calling on the government to state what is its intention regarding any extension of the state of emergency. Mrs. Sitahal said, the entire country of Trinidad and Tobago is under a state of emergency. There is no limited state of emergency. There is no limited state of emergency. The Council wishes it to be noted that this state of emergency is not in the least limited in fact or impact. Why am I saying this, Mr. President? This is not the first time. No matter what new or novel or unusual circumstances the government is attempting to paint in this country in the year 2026, this is not the first time they've attempted to discriminate and impose state of emergency conditions outside of the constitutional arrangements for same and to impose them based on geographic determinations. Determined by exactly, Mr. President, he's taking me where I want to go. So whether we are talking about this administration, the next administration, a former administration, that power, the leader of government business shouted out, remember when they put a SOE for the speaker?
Mr. President, he's pointing at me. That's very rude.
Don't point. He doesn't want to point. Continue.
I wouldn't point at him. But I may gesture in making my point to the government bench. Thank you very much. Mr. President, this is not the first time they've attempted this. And the power that they are seeking, the weak case that they've made, does not justify this government, the next government, or any government being granted this unusual powers. So I've been prevented from going into Clause 6, so I will not belabor that point. Mr. President, I have some considerations that I would like to share at this stage of the debate to basically tie the opposition's case and concerns together. And I will pose them in the way of questions to the government of Trinidad and Tobago and questions to all senators who would be considering the matter at hand. First of all, has the government's case been based on evidence? Has data been presented, Mr. Attorney General, through you, Mr. President, in this debate to support the measures being advanced by this government at this time? I would say not, Mr. President. What I did hear is considerable fear-based presentations. I heard the young senator who speaks very well, Senator Daniel Rashid, make an entire presentation on two alleged cases. Maria and what was Jack and Maria. An entire 40 minutes, all hinged around one word, fear. But Mr. President, fear is no substitute for evidence, data, and persuasion. So we have to make our decisions based on evidence. So I would have wanted the government to respect this debate sufficiently to present a better case
Mr.
than
President, I
that.
stand on 53(1)(b). This point has been raised. The ask for evidence has been made by Senator Atts and was answered.
What's the standing order?
53(1)(b), this is a repetitive point.
Can we just have a seat? Members, I'm on my legs. Can I have silence? Could you quote the standing order that you're
I
referring
stood
to?
on 53(1)(b). His ask is for data to be presented. This ask has already been made by Senator Atts and answered.
I think Senator Brown doesn't have much more time at his disposal. I'll allow him to continue. You finished?
Just after 4. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. Mr. President, secondly, given the nature of the request of us as senators, can this government be trusted? Have they demonstrated sufficient transparency to justify the granting of these extraordinary powers? I dare say, Mr. President, they have not. Even in the nature of these exchanges, there's a demonstration of unwillingness to be examined, unwillingness to even receive or respond to questions. And under those circumstances, how can we entrust them in these circumstances? Mr. President, I started by saying this is a very bizarre debate. Very, very bizarre. And then you had the Minister of Defense talking about it's a good start if somebody's pants is hanging down, maybe they have a gun. Very, very, does not for trust make, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also want to indicate that it is expected of all governments of Trinidad and Tobago that they demonstrate adherence, not just to domestic law, but international law as well. Mr. President, I have a question. Should the circumstances around the implementation of this bill not go as the population would wish or as the government would wish, should we end up in a militarized condition similar? We are all familiar with what's happening in the United States of America. It's relevant to our circumstance as the potential when less than well-trained individuals.
Mr. President, 46-1.
Have a seat.
46-1.
Have a seat.
How is that remotely relevant, Mr. President, to the bill? Talking about the U.S. and foreign affairs. 46-1, Mr. President. Relevance.
Yeah, just connect your points so at least, the relevance could be shown, please.
Mr. President, what we are contemplating here is to send in police and the defense force by geographic determination into community. What could be more relevant than that? It's happening every day on our headlines,
Mr. President, 53(1)(b), that is persistent, tedious, and repetitious.
I will determine tedious repetition. Continue.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. They're afraid of the truth. They can't handle the truth.
Mr. President, why is he shouting?
So, Mr. President, the lecture will resume. The lecture will resume. So, Mr. President,
Mr. President, standing order.
Sit down.
Mr. President, standing order.
Sit down.
Standing order on a point of order, Mr. President.
No. Take a seat. Take a seat. Take your seat. Now listen. We cannot continue to defy rules in this House. This is a rules-based order. You are rising on a point of order. Could you identify the point of order, please?
Mr. President, I stood on Standing Order 46.4 and 46.6, the last outburst by the member that was speaking.
Okay, members, I know the temperature is rising, so although we are coming to the end of your contribution, temperature is rising. Let's conduct ourselves in a dignified and civilized manner and not engage in any kind of responses that could warrant continuous intervention. Read the standing orders. Continue, please.
Mr. President, I say it again. This government cannot handle the truth and they cannot stand scrutiny. They do not receive questions. They do not respond to questions, and therefore their case has collapsed.
President, I stand on 46.1. Mr. President, I stand on 46.1. This has no relevance to the debate that we're doing right now.
And for injury time.
Well, you have no injury time to get, like the first one. I'm going to allow you to continue, Senator Brown, but please connect your points to some aspect of the legislation as far as is practically possible. Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, okay. Let's go on to question number 3. Is there a limit to the number or range of these zones? What prevents this government or any government from declaring a special zone across all of Trinidad and Tobago, with the exception of one village or one island, let's say Tobago, or any other location? And that completely circumvents the intention to avoid a declaration of a state of emergency. In other words, are we giving the government a tool of convenience which allows them to circumvent this constitution as it exists, but to achieve the same purport of a state of emergency? Mr. President, that is a...
53(1)B, where mention was made already by that bench of a mini SOE and addressed.
Both of you all can't stand at the same time. I think he's moving on. Continue.
Mr. President, on the issue of funding, we got a lot of verbiage on social programs. In fact, the member who just tried to intervene gave some verbiage on social programs. But, Mr. President, what happens to these individuals in those communities declared as a special zone? Mr. President, the government...
I just came back in. Tedious repetition.
I think that point has been made, Senator Brown, as you know. So if you could move on to some other point, or if you're developing a new point under the Social Transformation Committee, I think it would be acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, the government has said that they respect democracy. I heard presentations by the democratically elected representatives of the people of urban areas in Trinidad and Tobago in this parliament indicate that the people that they represent do not want the imposition of these special zones. I heard that with my own 2 ears. And then you have unelected, by their own admission, senators standing up to say they know what the people want. If we respect democracy, why are we subjugating the voices of the duly elected people of these constituencies, Mr. President? Why is that so? Why is that so? And then they want to pin them in at the end on a committee when it's already a fait accompli. Mr. President, the government has to respond to these considerations. They spoke in the lower house of debate, and the government has not presented any support for this claim that the people of Sealots, the people of Beetham, the people of Covine and Factory Road want the imposition of these special zones. The least they could have done is engage in some formal mechanism of consultation. There was enough time, maybe not in the...
Mr. President, I stand on 53.
Sit down.
Sit down.
Just Senator Rashid, could you apologize?
I apologize.
Listen, only one person in this house can order somebody to take their seat. Nobody else. That is disrespectful. It will not be tolerated in this house. Okay? There's only one presiding officer in this house. So I don't want anyone to take it upon themselves to tell any member of this Senate, whether it's government, independent, or opposition, sit down. That is totally out of line and will not be tolerated in this house. I make myself clear. You have a point of order? Raise your point of order.
Mr. President, I stand on Standing Order 53-1B. The consultation thing has been spoken about by every PNM member. Yes. Senator Brown, you have 3 more minutes and so on. Use it properly.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, and again, I think there's a misunderstanding. Just throwing a phrase does not mean there's repetition. I'm giving my own personal perspective as a senator on the issue. And what I'm saying is the duly elected representatives of these persons have said the people don't want this imposition, Mr. President. Mr. President, I will move...
Rise on Standing Order 53-1B. He is now repeating, even himself is repeating what he himself had said, and he continues to repeat.
Yeah. Senator Brown, unless you have something new that you'd like to put on the table, I think you just have 2 more minutes. I ask you to use those 2 minutes productively. Please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I once served as the Minister of Foreign and CARICOM Affairs of this country. And I have done an examination of other societies in which some citizens, depending on geography, have different rights than other citizens. And some of the examples I was able to find include the land of Gaza, where some citizens have more rights than others, depending on geography. I was able to find...
Mr. President, 46-4, and you should nip this before it goes down that road.
Listen. What's your point of order, Senator?
46-4. This road...
No, what is
46-4.
46-4. What is the imputation?
Mr. President, he is about to compare Trinidad and Tobago to war-torn regions and use their...
No. All right, okay. No. I don't... If he's going there and it is egregious, I will intervene. Continue, please.
Mr. President, I see what they're about. They will not succeed in this debate. Mr. President, I want to close by quoting the words of the Prime Minister of Canada, the Honorable Mark Carney, who gave a historic speech this week in Switzerland. And he said this: "The power of the powerless begins with honesty. The power of the powerless begins with honesty." If we cannot have a rational debate on an issue of this magnitude, unprecedented in parliamentary history,
Remember, yeah. 49, you have to take a seat. Yeah. Take a seat. All right, thank you very much. Shouting doesn't mean that it will happen. So we don't have to sit there. Okay? I now call on the Honorable Attorney General.